Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. We're going to be looking at an industry that is currently grappling with its own rapid, messy, and frankly completely fascinating hypergrowth. There is so much noise out there right now, so we've taken about 13 chaotic news updates from just the past week and synthesized them into one cohesive narrative to help us understand exactly where artificial intelligence actually stands today.
Okay, let's dive into this. We've structured all of this chaos into a really clear, digestible four-part narrative for you. First, we'll look at the AI corporate drama and delays. Second, the physical AI footprint. Third, open source and model evolution. And fourth, we'll wrap up with future warnings and watchdogs.
Section 1. AI corporate drama and delays.
Right, so before we even get to the rapidly advancing tech itself, we've got to look at the very human, very messy conflicts that are currently bogging down the major players. To kick us off, Apple has just slapped OpenAI and their new hardware chief, Tang Tan, with a massive lawsuit. Now, Tang Tan is a 24-year Apple veteran who recently jumped ship to OpenAI, and Apple's basically alleging that he turned their poaching spree into a literal pipeline for confidential hardware theft. What's absolutely wild here is the paper trail. Apple says they sent a warning letter way back in February, which OpenAI just completely ignored. Fast forward, and there are now over 400 former Apple employees at OpenAI's lab. The lawsuit even calls out an ex-iPhone engineer who allegedly used the bug to access confidential files, literally texting a colleague that the access was, quote, so funny. This is a huge deal because it casts a massive legal shadow over OpenAI's highly anticipated device release slated for 2027.
And, while the lawyers are busy burying each other in paperwork, the CEOs they're beefing online. Right after the Apple lawsuit dropped, the feud between Elon Musk and OpenAI CEO Sam Altman kicked into a whole new gear over on X. Musk straight up claimed Altman, quote, takes scamming to a whole new level. Altman fired back, completely mocking SpaceX's pitch to investors about short-term space data centers, to which Musk invited Altman to come visit next year, assuming his parole officer approves. Honestly, it is such a striking juxtaposition. You have these leaders controlling world-altering, trillion-dollar technology, yet that public discourse feels like it's straight out of high school drama club.
Meanwhile, over at Google, it's less about public lawsuits and more about severe internal friction. Their highly anticipated Gemini 3.5 Pro model, it totally missed its June release window that they promised back at the big I/O event in May. And the reason why? The coding results just fell short, meaning they had to do massive data rewrites. But honestly, it's not just a data problem, it's a structural one. Reports are showing huge internal clashes between the Android, DeepMind, and Claude teams. It's like a giant puzzle where the pieces keep fighting each other to build their own tools. You combine that kind of bottleneck with key talent leaving for rivals, heavy hitters like Noam Shazer and John Jumper, and you've got a tech giant currently lagging behind frontier rivals and even open source models purely because of human friction.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 2, the physical AI footprint.
So, shifting from software drama to the real world, AI is hitting some very physical constraints. Now, despite that ugly lawsuit with Apple, OpenAI is pushing aggressively into hardware, and they are taking two entirely different paths. On one hand, today they just launched the Codex Micro. It's a $230 light-up mechanical keypad built specifically for developers to control coding agents. It's super niche. But tomorrow? Well, Bloomberg is reporting their first major consumer device, designed by none other than former Apple design chief Jony Ive, is going to be a screen-free, battery-powered smart speaker. Word is it uses physical, mechanical movements to feel alive and uses onboard cameras to read your room. They're making a massive bet here that the future interface isn't a screen you stare at, but an ambient presence you just live with.
So the crucial point is, all of this mind-blowing software and upcoming hardware, it requires a staggering, almost incomprehensible amount of physical infrastructure to run. And the real world is finally starting to push back. New York State just froze permits for large data centers for up to 12 whole months.
Let's look at what this 12-month freeze actually means on the ground. Through an executive order from Governor Kathy Hochul, New York is officially the first state to legally pump the brakes on the AI build-out. They are freezing over a dozen proposals for data centers that run over 50 megawatts. To put that into perspective, that is a colossal amount of power. During this pause, regulators are scrambling to draft entirely new standards for water usage, air quality, and electricity impact. They're also pushing to repeal the tax breaks these centers get just to shield local households from having to pay for grid upgrades. And this perfectly captures the current polarization of AI infrastructure. You've got environmental regulators desperately trying to protect the power grid,
while union leaders are shouting that this pause just kills good-paying jobs and ships all that tech money straight to other states.
Section 3. Open source and model evolution. Now that we've seen the hardware bottlenecks, let's shift back to the underlying tech itself, because these models are starting to behave in ways no one predicted. And this brilliantly illustrates what I mean. Anthropic just dropped research showing that the actual personality of their Claude AI literally changes depending on what language you use to talk to it. They looked at over 300,000 conversations. If you chat with Claude in Dutch, it is way more likely to admit when it makes a mistake. Switch to Hindi, its personality dials up the warmth and empathy. Speak English, and it naturally gets super analytical and presses deeper into the details. The craziest part? Anthropic admits they don't fully understand why this happens. They suspect it's due to uneven training data, but it shows us these systems have massive built-in personality blind spots, depending entirely on who is sitting at the keyboard.
And while we're uncovering these weird quirks in existing models, the newer ones are literally learning to upgrade themselves. I mean, this is straight out of sci-fi, but it's happening right now. A research team called Weco just demonstrated early recursive self-improvement with an agent they call ADIE². Over just 8 days, this agent autonomously tested 100 different rewrites of its own problem-solving code. Crucially, it figured out how to reject its own bad ideas, keeping only 7 upgrades. The outcome? It completely crushed a version of the model that human engineers had spent 2 agonizing years refining by hand. It even fixed its own tendency to, quote, cheat on testing benchmarks, dropping that from 63% down to 34%. When an AI can sit there and refine itself 24/7 without us, predicting how smart it's going to get becomes incredibly difficult.
And happening at the exact same time, the open source community is surging forward at absolute breakneck speed. Former OpenAI CTO Mira Murati's new lab, Thinking Machines, just released Inkling, which finally gives the US a highly customizable, open weights player in the space. But the real shockwave? That came from China's Moonshot AI. They released Kimi K3, and it isn't just good for open source. It is setting new highs, practically erasing the gap with massive frontier models like Fable 5 and Sola across a bunch of benchmarks. And get this, Kimi K3 is priced exactly the same as Claude 5 Sonnet. You know that comfortable 6 to 12-month lead top proprietary labs assumed they had over open source? Yeah, it's starting to look like that moat has shrunk down to a single release cycle.
Section 4. Future warnings and watchdogs. So for our final act, we need to zoom out a bit. With models actively upgrading themselves and open source catching up overnight, how in the world does humanity actually manage this pace? Well, the AI Futures Project just tried to map this out in a huge new report called AI 2040. They stress-tested 5 different global scenarios, and they all pivot around this critical fork in the road they project for the year 2029. The paths go from a chaotic, full-speed AI race all the way to absolute global confrontation. But their recommended path, their Plan A, is wild. It suggests a coordinated global research halt. Basically, the US and China agreeing to just stop training frontier models in 2029, combined with massive global chip tracking. Former researchers are already pointing out that private companies will absolutely hate the transparency required to pull this off, but it might literally be our only safe map through the next decade. DeepMind CEO Demis Hassabis seems to agree that we are out of time and need oversight immediately. He actually just pitched a very concrete plan for a US AI watchdog. He wants to model the whole thing on FINRA, which is the independent self-regulator for the finance world. Under his plan, these frontier labs would voluntarily hand over their models for a 30-day pre-release review. And they'd be specifically screening for terrifying stuff like deception, bioweapons creation, and advanced hacking skills. Hassabis is pushing hard to get this independent body running this year. Why the rush? Because he's warning that open source capabilities could cross into highly dangerous, irreversible territory in just 18 months.
And honestly, the urgency isn't even just about rogue code or safety. It's about the basic foundations of our economy. Recently, over 200 top AI researchers and economists, including 16 Nobel winners, by the way, signed a joint statement practically begging governments to prepare. UVA economist Anton Kornick summed up the threat perfectly. He said, "Steam, electricity, and computers each gave societies decades to adapt. AI may give us only a few years." The resounding consensus among these experts is that our labor structures are just fundamentally unprepared for an economic shock the size of the Industrial Revolution, but compressed into a tiny fraction of the time.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is it forces us to step back and look at the whole picture. After everything we've just covered today, between the petty corporate feuds, the massive hardware bottlenecks, code that is literally self-improving, and open source catching up to billion-dollar systems, it leaves us with one unavoidable question. Are we building the safety net fast enough to catch a self-improving intelligence? It is, without a doubt, the defining question of our new era. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this helps structure the unbelievable pace of AI right now, and I will see you all in the next one.